Harry, would you please begin by telling us about the early years in Bridgewater?
Okay, Betty, I was born March 12th, 1929. My parents lived on Victoria Road, 59 Victoria Road, and that's where I grew up, on that in that location. Anything you want to know about the town from that time on, I have some notes that I made.
Okay, but if you could just kind of think back and remember about your school years, I suppose those would be the earliest years you'd remember.
Yeah. Yes, we lived quite close to the school. The school at that time, there was an annex on Queen Street, and the main school was on the west side of Queen Street, and the annex was on the other side, on the east side, which is now the parking lot for the Catholic Church. But the main school was on Queen Street, and it wasn't a very long walk from where I lived, just out through the backyard, and I was there. And
did you have a favorite teacher, or a teacher who put the fear into you?
Oh, there were a number of teachers. I get along with most of them. I think probably the teacher one of the worst teachers I had was in grade 1, and she certainly a far cry from the primary teachers and grade 1 teachers that we have today.
Yes.
Very strict and so on. So some of my experiences in my early school days weren't all that pleasant, and I never thought I was that bad. So anyway, I have some good memories of school.
Did you play sports in school?
No, I didn't play sports. Unfortunately, I was born with a congenital heart problem. It wasn't discovered until I was 12 years old. And that would have been the time when I would have gotten involved in, like things like hockey and baseball. My mother took me to Dr. Davis, and he advised that I shouldn't get into any sports that would be demanding or real physical in nature. So I didn't. So it changed my life considerably, I did other things. I worked a lot. We didn't have much money. My parents weren't wealthy at all. And I would take a job whenever I could get, to earn some money. And I did that growing up.
So with your heart, did you have to have an operation, or was it something that you outgrew eventually?
No, it wasn't something that I outgrew. That was the problem. I should have outgrown it. I guess that's the normal way it goes. But I was lucky, I guess. After I got married and had some children, I tried many times to buy life insurance. I was always turned down, which was never a good feeling when you turn down for health reasons when you're in your 20s. Right. So finally one agent sent me to Dr. Frazier for an examination. And he said, after he spent quite a bit of time with me, and he referred me to John Wickwire, his brother-in-law in Liverpool, who had been studying heart down in the States somewhere. And he, in turn, referred me to a surgeon in Halifax, and I had surgery that corrected that. And after that, I lived a normal life, and I'm here almost a few days. I'll be 84, and I'm really lucky to have good health. But I wouldn't have had if I hadn't had that surgery, right. And I have some people to thank for that.
Sure. Yeah. And who were your school friends?
My school friends, there was a Frazier family that lived across the street, and my cousin just lived up the street. He was close in age, and Charles Cook.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And so most of my friends were right there in the neighborhood. Some of them were relatives, and some of them were just friends.
Were you You were
David
in
Rudolph. I don't know if you remember the Rudolph family.
Yes.
David Rudolph and I were very good friends. They lived right on the corner of York Street and
Did the Guy family live up your way, or?
No, they lived in the south end of town. Dave was my age, and I knew David very well in school.
And you were in the Boy Scouts.
Oh yes, I was in the Cubs, the Boy Scouts. Both my scout leaders are since gone. Frank Gow was one of them, and Bud Frazier, who never lived here after his family moved away, and Wendell Melton, who just passed away this past week.
Yes.
And he was a scout leader, and I enjoyed those programs very much.
Your father started Cook's Oil?
My father started working for a company called McCall Frontenac Oil Company. They were, head office was in Montreal, and he started in 1930. And when I was 17, I joined him. His health wasn't very good, and so I went to work there.
And how long did Cook's Oil stay in business?
The company was sold by my son a few years ago, and when he sold it to Imperial Oil, we were the largest supplier of heating oil in the county.
So, who were some of your drivers? Do you remember?
Oh gosh, I had Charles Langell, who still lives on the only remaining farm in Bridgewater. You know, Bridgewater, when I grew up, there were a lot of farms in Bridgewater.
Yeah.
You know, the golf course,
Yeah.
you know, was a farm. Across the street was a farm. Those were all in the town. The Langell farm over at the top of Aberdeen Road,
Yeah.
that's the only one that's remaining and being still used as a farm.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of farms in Bridgewater. And
But you must have given quite a bit of employment to
yes, over the years we employed a lot of people.
men, local men.
Yes, yeah.
Who influenced you? Anyone in your,
Who influenced
you were young?
Gosh, I don't know. I guess my parents, my father and mother, you know, I always had a lot of respect for them. I had an uncle in Halifax who also I had a lot of time for. He was kind of instrumental in getting me into the Masonic Lodge, and I served as Master of the Lodge in 1976. Yeah.
Oh.
And I was president of the Kinsman Club, and I met a lot of good people in the Kinsman Club. Andy Gow, I think, would be one of the most prominent. But there were a lot of people, Bud Rayfuse and Charles Copeland, and a lot of people that I met.
Were you a member of the Lions, too?
No, just the Kinsman. Yeah.
And the Chamber of Commerce?
Yes, but never active in the Chamber of Commerce, except when I was mayor, I addressed the chamber each year. I always had an annual address to the chamber each year. And so I guess maybe a lot of it I was busy. I had a very demanding job, and when we started working, we worked 6 days a week. And the kind of work we did, we were on call 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, you know, with the heating oil and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a demanding job.
When did you become interested in politics?
It just kind of happened. I was approached by a group of business leaders in the town who asked me to run for town council. And I thought about it, and then I agreed, said I would, and so I ran and was elected in 1973. I served one term on council, and then the same group, more or less, approached me and asked me if I would run for mayor. John Hurtle was mayor at the time, and he was one of the group. He didn't want to reoffer. And so I did. I offered for mayor, and I went in by acclamation. No one opposed me. And I went 4 times. I was 4 terms as mayor to 1988. and I was acclaimed 3 out of the 4. And so I didn't have to work too hard to get elected.
Did you have any challenges when you were mayor?
Oh yeah, there were a lot of challenges. We had a lot of challenges. We had, when I was on council, we were in a real growth period as a result of Michelin coming here and starting up in 1969, 70. And things would just seem to be snowballing, and there were challenges every day. My son came and joined me in CocaCola, and I spent my 12 years as mayor. I spent most of my time doing work at the town office, and it was extremely busy. And we had a lot of playing catch up with all kinds of things, infrastructure and so on throughout the town. We had during my office, we opened the Social Regional Hospital. There was an awful lot of time spent planning to renovate the hospital up on Dufferin Street, and then after about 10 years of planning, decided it was easier and less costly to build one on the east side of the river. And so the Bridgewater Development Commission made the land available, and we proceeded to build that hospital that we have today. That was one of the things. We built we were successful in getting the province to build a 4-lane bridge. We were having a lot of traffic problems with just the 2-lane bridge, getting back and forth and so on. Some of the things I'd like to talk about. You okay? You want a glass of water? You'll have to edit this in. So you want some water?
No, it's okay.
So I guess things I'd like to say for the record. I said I grew up on Victoria Road, and we're going back now, and I was born in '29, so we're talking about the 30s and the 40s. And Victoria Road, I'm sure you'll agree, is one of the busiest streets in Bridgewater, connecting to the 4-lane bridge. But it was busy then. But there was a different kind of traffic. We had a lot of horse and wagon and ox teams coming to Bridgewater, especially on Saturday morning. There would just be a continuous stream coming in from the Wildville and beyond, like Chelsea and Newcomville and all those places, Baker's Settlement. People were coming to Bridgewater to do business. They had to buy food, they had to buy things for their farm and feed for their animals, and it was really a busy street. And King Street, if you stop and think back in the 40s, when I was just beginning my teens, we had everything pretty well between Victoria Road and Maple Street. We had, I had made a note of some of them here. We had 3 banks. We had 3 drugstores. We had several grocery stores. We had 2 meat markets. We had a fish market. We had 2 hardware stores. We had 2 menswear clothing and several ladies' wear clothing. We had 2 shoe stores. We had 2 department stores, Stedman's and the Royal Store. And that's going back a ways. We had 3 bakeries. We had Simone on the first part of King Street, north. And we had the French pastry. The Fred Serbeck. And then down past Dufferin Street in that block, we had Mr. Johnson, Ned Johnson, who had a bakery. And they were all busy. They were all baking bread and cookies and cake and you name it. That's, you know. We had a number of barber shops. We had several, or a couple at least, hair salons for ladies. We had candy stores and tobacco stores. We had 2 car dealers, a Ford dealer and a Chevrolet dealer. And we had also the Bridgewater Dairy, who pasteurized our milk. We had 2 Chinese restaurants. We had the Blue Nose Tea Room, operated by Mr. Taylor. And we had a laundry and dry cleaning business. We had Hillman's, who operated quite a general store, actually, on the south part of King Street. That would be just past where Coe's Restaurant is now, down there. And so, and beyond that, we had Mr. Hall, who sold coal and feed and so on. And so King Street, as you can see on a Saturday night, you could hardly walk down the sidewalk. There were so many people on the street. We had legal offices, law offices. People came for those kind of services. Department of Highways had their office on King Street in Bridgewater. And then if you go to the east side across the bridge to LaHave Street, you had a truck dealer over there, a car dealer. You had a couple of service stations. You had the LaHave Creamery that made butter and ice cream. Across from them, you had the Lunenburg Milling Company, which were really big in selling feed and fertilizer and all those kinds of things, you know. And of course, certainly not least, the railway station was really a busy, busy place. They had a...
Did the railway station burn down while you were in office?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the old station. Well, there was a freight shed there. There was a repair shop. It was called the Round Table, you know. They put the things in there, engines and so on, to work on them. And there were a lot of people employed by the railway in Bridgewater. It was one of the main industries. Yeah. We also had a sawmill over where the Superstore is now. There was a sawmill there, Telford and Kroll, and then it became H.W. Brady after that. One time they had a building there that it was the first skating rink. They played hockey. Now, I never skated there, but we skated in the exhibition building. They put ice in there. We used to skate up there before the arena was built in 1950, when the Bridgewater Memorial Arena was built. And so Bridgewater has changed a lot since those days. An awful lot. I think the first move from King Street was the Dominion store. They built a store over across the river. It was right where. Do you want to wait for a while? Can you shut that off?
I should. I'll just pause.
Yeah. I can go right.
It's so dry.
Yeah, go get some water.
Yeah, I can't get it. The door is open. had in church when it's dry. I had to sneeze. I should have sneezed.
Still running?
I had to sneeze. I should have sneezed.
Watch your purse. Don't trip over it.
When you were talking about King Street, I happened to think about first when we came here, there was a gentleman who made his own candy down on the bottom of King Street.
Mr. Lowe.
Mr. Lowe, yes.
That's what I said with candy stores and a place that made candy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those things long gone and people wouldn't be aware of them. Dominion Street that goes all the way up to High Street. When I was growing up, the end of Dominion Street was where the curling rink is now. And all that area that's now developed into residential was just either a pasture or a gravel pit or open. The Fairview Hotel used it for pasture because they kept cows and things. There's another prominent place that's gone now, gone forever, burned.
Yeah.
Another old landmark is the post office we have down on King Street, which has changed its use forever. And we had a theater, which was a really busy theater, operated by the Fielding family, and that was directly behind the post office, and the entrance to it was off of Pleasant Street. And of course there was an exit that came out on Dominion Street, and so on. But those shows, I used to work at the theater doing little odd jobs when I was a kid, and they changed the show 3 times a week. You'd have a show for Monday and Tuesday, and Wednesday and Thursday, and then Friday and Saturday. And they were usually busy, You'd have matinees on Saturday afternoon. The rest of the time would be like in the evening, 7 o'clock and 9 o'clock, the 2 shows. And it was so a lot. Like I say, there's a lot of changes, but most things in Bridgewater took place like downtown. The fire hall was on Pleasant Street at that time. When they built the new fire hall, the fireplace, the fire hall was on Pleasant Street, and the Public Works Department operated in that same building. And then when they built a fire hall and they built a Public Works building up on St. Philip Street, the town we renovated during my term of office, we rented that into the building it is today. It's the town office. But when I first started on council, the council room was the fire department's meeting room upstairs.
Yeah.
Which it's quite a different council chambers that they have now.
Right. It used to be an old guide cabin.
Right across from the curling rink.
Yeah.
There was a guy, and Mr. Rudolph, who lived on the corner of York Street and Dominion, he had a chicken house there, and he kept chickens. I remember that. No, you wouldn't remember that. But that was the end of that street, and there was no development. And then I think the first moves from King Street was the Dominion going across the river, and then the IGA store, and a few other things up on the plaza. But then one time we had a racetrack up there. Heber Sweeney had a racetrack and kept horses. So
Harley Spence.
Harley Spence got involved later. Harley Spence opened a car dealership right there and that building's called Dufferin Place. And that was Harley Spence, and he had a Studebaker dealership there. And he lived in a house back behind that. It was another farm area, actually, quite a big house there. So.
Yes. Bridgewater has changed a lot over the last few years.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. So when I was growing up, I guess one way I entertained myself was skiing. Where we lived on Victoria Road, the original house was on the other side of the street. It was on the north side of the street. And there was a barn and there was another building there, they called it a carriage house, where they kept farm equipment. And where the house is now that I was brought up in, that was just a huge hill. And my grandfather planted apple trees and they farmed. And they kept cows right there in town in that barn. And when my father was young, he used to take those cows down King Street every morning, cross the bridge, and up Aberdeen Road to a pasture. And at night he would bring them back, because they were all dairy cows. They had to be milked. And one time they had maybe 10 or 12 cows. And this is what would happen. I know my father's telling about that. And the house burned. And so they built a house across the street, and that's the one that I grew up in. I grew up there with my father and my mother, Ralph and Olive Cook, and my grandmother. And my mother came from Wallace, Cumberland County. She was a McInnes. And she came down here first to work at the Dawson Memorial Hospital. She was a nurse. And my grandmother came from on Albany Cross, which is about halfway to Middleton on number 10 highway. That's where she came from. Yeah. So, and my grandfather's name was Henry, and my name is Henry. And we both went by Harry, because that's what we were called, Harry, and that was it. And so my father's name, of course, was Ralph.
So your father wouldn't have been related to the cook who had the meat?
Frank Cook was his brother.
Frank was Ralph's brother.
Yes, and that was Charles Weagle's meat market when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Many a piece of bologna I got in there after school. And Frank married Charles Weagle's daughter. And they had one child, and that's my cousin, Charles Cook, who passed away a year ago. A year ago this March, coming up. And so...
Does he still live in PEI?
Yes, he was living there when he died. His widow was still living there. She came from up in Barcett's Corner, that area. Yeah, Marie Oikel. So that was the family. There were 3 brothers in my family. They were my dad's family. It was Frank. Lester was the oldest. He lived in Halifax. And Frank always lived in Bridgewater. And my father lived in Bridgewater. And I never knew my grandfather. He died before I was born. And so I didn't have too many grandparents. So it's quite an interesting... I'll tell you one interesting thing. When I was 10 years old, I came home from school. It was a winter day in December, cold. I was outside playing, and I went in and I complained to Mom that I had a really bad pain in my stomach. And so she called Dr. Fraser. And another thing I owe to him. Wasn't long when he showed up in the backyard in his little car and came in and examined me, and he said, I'm not sure. It could be his appendix. He said, keep an eye on him. And he said, if he still has the pain in the morning, call me back. She did. I went to bed, but I had this pain and it never went away. And so the next morning, Dr. Fraser shows up in his car. Mom had me all dressed with a little bag. And I went out and got in Dr. Fraser's car, and he drove me up to the old Dawson Memorial Hospital, took me and took my appendix out. My mother had no transportation, you see. Now, isn't that a story? You know, like a doctor like Dr. Fraser.
You don't find that today.
And he lived right here in Bridgewater. No, you don't find that today, of course. Wouldn't be possible to do that today. But I mean, I've never forgotten that. I was only 10. But, yeah, it was quite an experience. Yeah. So a couple of things I owe Dr. Fraser for if I ever meet him again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Which church did the Cooks go to?
When I was growing up, I went to the St. John's United Church, which was on the corner of Phoenix and Maple. Apartment buildings are there now. That church was finally abandoned, and the church and the hall were torn down, the property sold. Church Manse used to be right across on Maple Street, there, just behind where Dr. Fraser lived. Then they joined the Grace United Church, which was on the corner of Dominion and Queen. There's an apartment building there now. And finally, they closed that church, sold the property, built a church on Hillcrest Street, corner of Hillcrest and Dominion. And that's the church today, the Bridgewater United Church.
Did you sing in the choir?
No, I never sang in the choir. No, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. So, no, I didn't sing in the choir, but I was quite active in the church. I was on the session till I became mayor, and then I thought, well, I'm not going to be much use to the church, so I resigned from that. Which the session of the United Church is kind of like the Senate in Ottawa. You never have to resign. Once you're appointed, you can stay there forever. Yeah. I felt that I didn't have to do that. But I worked hard to raise money to build that church, along with an awful lot of people, you know. And so that was my church experience. The other churches in town are pretty well all intact. You know, the Catholic Church, it's there, same church, been there since as long as I can remember. The Anglican Church and the Baptist Church and the Lutheran Church are all churches that are still there today and still operating. The United Church was the only one that really made a move, you know. So, but I guess it was good for them. It gave them a stronger congregation. You know, to have one church. So churches are costly to operate.
Were the Scouts and the Cubs associated with a church when you were?
No, not so. We had a Scout cabin that was on where the park pond is. You see, if you go back when I was growing up, Alexander Avenue stopped right there where Judge Robertson lived, up on the house that's kind of up off the street. That was the last house. And there was a gate there, and the town dumped. They used that for a dump at that time. Until they finally bought a property up off of St. Philip Street and used that until during the time I was mayor, we joined with the municipality in opening Why Not Settlement. And we got rid of dumping in the town of Bridgewater at that time. But when I used to work for Ray Goddard at Goddard Pharmacy when I was in my teens, and on Saturday morning, Ray and I would always take the garbage down to the end of Alexander Avenue and dump it there and watch the rats. That place was infested with rats.
Who was the man that used to live? Remember there was a little shack and a man lived there? Do you remember who he was?
Trying to think.
Was it a Hurdle?
It may have been, but I can't really remember. I can't remember what his name was. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
They found him
Yeah.
caught on fire one night, I think, and he burnt to death.
Yeah. But yeah, we had a Scout cabin, and that's where we were non-denominational. If you wanted to join the Cubs or the Scouts, you showed up. And we almost met once a week, and it was a good organization then. We learned a lot. You know, our camping was just like day trips. We'd go.
Yeah.
We didn't do much overnight. I can't remember overnight camping, not like they do today. But so it was early Bridgewater, and it was certainly a lot different than it is today. but we still have the Lahave River running through the middle of it. And it's just as beautiful now as it was then.
Yeah.
We've cleaned it up a lot. We've removed a lot of the sewage from it, as far up as New Germany and so on. We've removed sewerage, not just the town of Bridgewater, municipality as well. And a lot of the sewage is collected and treated. And the affluent was put back in the river. But that's
Were you mayor when the new sewage plant went in?
Yes. We had one before, when John Hurley was mayor. There was one built right where Sobeys store is, but it wasn't big enough. It wasn't doing the job. So that one, well, the mall expanded, and that was just taken away, and the new one was put on down on Lahave Street. So a lot of the facilities and the infrastructure. We have a water treatment plant in Hebville, which certainly has improved the quality of the water. And I know when I was mayor and on the Public Service Commission, we talked about it, but it just took longer than I was there to do it. But it finally became a reality. So those are some of the highlights. When I was mayor, I got very involved in the municipal provincial association. They called the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities. And I was elected president of that in that organization in '81, and served there, and I served in many ways provincially with that organization. And thinking back when I was mayor, I think probably one of the highlights of my term of mayor was when the province hosted the royal visit from Prince Charles and Princess Di, and the province had a lobster dinner at the Parkview Education Center, and we shared a table with the Premier and his wife, the local member Mel Pickings and his wife, and Prince Charles and Princess Di. We were all at the same table. So that was quite an experience.
I'll say.
And, and I have a nice picture home that the Premier sent to Thelma and I of the two royal people signing the town's guest book, and we were standing behind them. And it's really...
Who was Premier then?
John Buchanan. Yes, John and Mavis Buchanan. They were both there, at the dinner. And there's a book. I have a book home, which they actually arrived on the Royal Yacht in Shelburne, and then they motored from there down through Liverpool and Bridgewater and into Lunenburg, and then they were whisked off into Halifax and put back in the ship, I guess. So it was.
Quite an experience.
It was really, it was a nice experience.
Did you get to speak to Charles and Diana?
Oh yes, at the table. We were able to converse, Yes.
Was she as outgoing as she seemed to be?
She seemed to be a little bit shy, I thought, on that occasion. But Thelma was closer to her sitting than I was, and she talked to her. And my wife always jokes that she named Harry, she was pregnant at the time, she named Harry after me. Because she asked Thelma, she said, is Harry his real name? And she said, well, actually his Christian name is Henry. They call him Harry. And she kind of smiled. And so that's how I always says that she named Harry. I mean, that's a bit of a stretch, but anyway, that's Thelma's little joke. So, but she did ask that question. It's interesting. Yeah, we have a very, very nice picture of that occasion. It's good. So what else can I help you with, Betty? Did I miss anything? don't think so. Bridgewater's always been pretty dear to me. You know something? I met a fellow in Dartmouth one time. He was a banker, and now he does accounting and things like that. He likes to boat. He has a yacht. And he said, you know, he said, if I move from where I live now, he said, I'd move to Bridgewater. He said, you have the best climate in the province of Nova Scotia. He said, I watched the temperatures and I watched the storms and all the rest, and he said, I think you live in one of the best parts of the world. And I think he was right, you know, because Bridgewater is really a pretty unique place to live, I think.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the history that Lunenburg has, you know, and so on, but the town, it just kind of grew. It was incorporated in 1899, and when you look at the growth that took place in the 20th century, you know, right. In 100 years, it's really it's phenomenal, really.
That's right.
If you look at Lunenburg and Mahone Bay, there hasn't been near the growth there. The county of Lunenburg has had tremendous growth. We have development all over the county. A large population and a large tax base. They do. They have a large tax base. So, but when I was president of the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities, I got involved in a number of things provincially. The Canadian Federation of Municipalities, I was on the board of directors, and they had appointed a lady in British Columbia as chairman of a membership drive. She asked me if I'd serve on it, and I said yes. We had very few municipalities in Nova Scotia that belonged to the Federation, the Canadian Federation. Very few, including the town of Bridgewater. So I went on that committee, and by the time we finished up the year, I don't think there was a municipality left or town or municipality in Nova Scotia that did belong. I canvassed all of them.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. Yes, and I served on a committee with a couple of guys in Halifax that had a lot more money than I did. Harry Porter was one, and Ken Rowe, who's the IMP group guy. And they were asked to raise money from various areas for the IWK when they had the big building thing back in the 80s, so early 80s. So they asked me if I would help them on that committee, and I did. And I visited practically every municipality in the province, and I spoke to them, and I devised a system by using the assessment rolls in all of them, and they wanted to raise $4 million from the municipal governments in the province. And $4 million, I just, through the assessment roll, I told each municipality what their share would be to reach the objective of $4 million. And they all did, and we raised their $4 million.
You got it.
Yeah. So I did a lot of things. I raised money for the Nova Scotia Art Gallery. And those things, they don't just belong to Halifax. Like the IWK actually serves the Atlantic provinces. I mean, that is one tremendous facility, you know.
Yeah.
And but that was back in the days when they built the new hospital. You know? So I did a lot, spent a lot of time on things like that. So anyway, we'd probably run that clock out by now. And
I don't know.
Do you have any?
I don't know what the noise is. Maybe it's something.
Maybe it's time we quit. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask.
No, I think I asked. I got pretty nosy and asked you all the questions that I had on my list. That I could think of.
Well, I don't know, sometimes you get talking about years ago and you kind of get rambling and you hope that somewheres in all of that you've said something that...
Well, sometimes it brings to your mind something that's just you've
yeah.
kind of forgotten.
I was sitting here thinking that of all the old landmarks that we had on King Street, Katy gas engines gone. We have a beautiful park there now, you know, shipyard. But the store, the corner store on the corner of Jubilee and King, when I was a kid, Captain Ellsworth, we always called him Captain Ellsworth, ran that store.
Yeah.
It's still there today.
Yeah.
And it's still quite a busy little store, you know.
Yeah.
And that, well, a lot of the other places, like for example the 3 bakeries that I had mentioned, there aren't any, there's no evidence of any of those.
That's right.
And,
The bakery on the corner of Dufferin and King,
that was the French.
Fred Surback.
Fred Survey.
Yeah. Who was the doctor that lived up in the back of that?
Let me think. In the back, right behind that building, there was Evelyn Stewart that lived
that's
there.
it.
Evelyn Stewart, she used to teach piano.
Yes.
Yeah, she lived there in that
Yeah.
quite a large house
Yeah.
and so on. Yeah, I knew Evelyn Stewart. Dr. Campbell lived on Dufferin. The house is still there. You know where that is, not too far up from, but just after you, if you walk starting from King Street past Pleasant Street on your left, there's quite a nice home there, house there. Yeah. And of course we had Dr. Bennett and Dr. Marcus and Dr. Duncan, who lived on the corner of King Street.
And there was a Dr. Rafuse, wasn't
Dr. Rafus was earlier. My father used to, Dr. Rafus lived there on Pleasant Street, right on the corner of Pleasant Street and Dominion Street. Quite a large home there, and that's all made into apartments. He lived there, and he had, there's a building behind that they made into an apartment or something. That used to be his barn where he kept a horse and wagon. And he would, you know, if he got a call in the middle of the night from Newcombville or Baker Settlement or somebody was having a child, a birth, he would call my father. And father would go over there and he'd harness up the horse and the wagon and get him, and he would take the doctor up to the, you know, you know, because people didn't have transportation and they didn't have ways, so doctors served, you know, that way back in those days. But the only one that I knew that made house call, well, I think Dr. Fred Prince made the odd house call, and maybe Ewart Morse, I'm not sure. Excuse me. But most of them didn't. They had offices. Dr. Marcus was on Pleasant Street, catching your problem.
Dr. Marcus
Dr. Bennett was
used
on
to,
Pleasant Street.
he used to make, because I lived in Hibbs Cross and he came back there.
Excuse me.
It's gotten to you.
It's getting, I said I caught you. So,
Well, you
They
gave
were
us a
pretty-
lot of...
they were pretty important people in the community, though, those doctors, and,
Yes, yes, they were.
yeah. So, anyway,
Well, you gave us a lot of good information.
well, I've been around for a long while. I don't know how much I've learned. I'll be 84 this coming month, so I've been here for a long time. Remember the start of the war? I remember during the war in 1941 as a scout. I couldn't get in the Sea Cadets. I think I told you that. They turned me down because of this heart murmur. But in the Scouts, we used to go out, they'd have blackouts at night, they'd ring the siren, and then you'd have to turn your lights out, pull the shades, and all the rest of it. And we would go out, and we would have jobs to do, you know, and so on in the town. All these exercises during the war.
Isn't that
And
something?
it was was quite an interesting time. Then I couldn't wait to join the Reserve Army, and the only way I could actually get into the Reserve Army was through your father-in-law, George Dolliver. He was the captain, and I went and I told him I wanted to join, and I said, but I got this problem, and I said, I know if I go for a medical, I said, they'll turn me down. But I said, I think I can do anything you guys are doing without hurting myself. He said, leave it with me. So he called Dr. Duncan, and he sent me down to see Dr. Duncan, and came back with a good health report. I joined the Reserve Army. So I stayed there in the Reserve. I joined in March 1945, and the war ended in April, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
April, yeah. And then so I stayed in there for 9 years.
Do you remember the West Novies up at the exhibition grounds?
Yes, during the war, when yes. And the drill hall that was right behind Sweeney's Funeral Home on Dufferin Street.
Yeah.
And that's where we used to meet for the Reserve Army.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember them, yeah. Yes, and there was evidence of war going on, although we were many, many miles away from it. Every week you'd go to the movies and it'd have that, what was it, Cathay News or something that would come on. You'd always get news items of the war overseas and things like that.
Yeah.
That was the only thing we got that
Yes.
go by. So it was quite interesting. Yeah. I never told you I had a boat on the LaHave River.
No.
When I was just I think I was 18, and Vic Kelman and I were over at the rink, and he said, "You interested in getting a boat?" I said, "I don't know, might be." He said, "I know where we can buy one." He said, "Pretty cheap. Let's go look at it." So we did. We bought this old boat from a fellow down in Dayspring. What was his name? Morris? Can't think of his last name now. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So we kept that for a year, and we sold it to a guy who took it to Halifax. And we had one built by Billy Rodenizer down in Pleasantville. It was a nice little boat, Cape Island boat, and we had a cabin on it, and we had it fixed up really nice. And we had kind of an unusual name for the boat. We called it Kill 'em and Cook 'em. We were kind of notorious on the LaHave River. And then finally I decided to get married, and I had to sell my half to Vic for $500. And then he sold the boat eventually to Bert O'Neill. Now, where it went after that, I have no idea. But it really was a nice boat. Yeah, it was really nice. Yeah. Vic still calls me Skipper. How you doing, Skipper?